Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story 1. When I was 15 years old, my parents decided to go visit my uncle. I didn't want to go with them. I preferred to stay home and hang out with my best friend Alex. We lived in a pretty quiet neighborhood where crime almost never happened, so my parents gave me permission to stay home alone and even invite Alex over. My mom left a note on the fridge with all the emergency numbers, and my dad asked me to call him if anything happened. I assured them everything would be fine, that Alex and I were just going to play video games and order pizza later. I called Alex and he arrived at my house about 15 minutes later. We played UFC on my PS4 for 2 hours and then ate pizza. After eating, we sat in the living room chatting about random things. At some point, we started talking about girls. Alex mentioned a website where you could talk to strangers called Omegle. He said he'd met some girls there, so we decided to check it out and see what it was like. For the first 30 minutes, no girls appeared. We were already getting bored, and just as I was about to close the page, 2 girls popped up on the screen. They were around our age, maybe a little older. We started talking to them, but they only typed. We could see they were trying to speak, but we couldn't hear them. We told them to turn on their microphone, but they replied that they didn't have one. Even so, we kept talking. We told them we were home alone, and they said they were too. They also mentioned they lived in the same city as us, even in the same area. That seemed weird to us because our town was small, and we'd never seen them before. After about 15 more minutes of chatting, they told us they thought we were cute and that we should meet up sometime. We were surprised because girls usually didn't suggest that to us. Then Alex gave them his Snapchat username. As soon as he typed his username, the connection cut out. We were really disappointed. We didn't even get their names. So we closed my laptop and went back to playing on the PS4. A while later, while we were still playing video games, Alex took out his phone. He had just received a Snapchat message from someone with the username unexplained. He opened it and it was a photo of the 2 girls we'd seen on Omegle. They were walking down the street and the message said, "Can we come over and hang out?" Alex immediately looked at me. He didn't say anything, but I knew what he was thinking. I told him no. He didn't like my answer, but he understood. Still, he wrote back saying they couldn't come over, maybe another day. A few minutes later, they replied, "Can we meet at the park instead?" Alex asked me if I wanted to go to the park to see them. The park was only a 10-minute walk from my house, but I still said no. At that point, Alex was getting a little annoyed and said he'd go with or without me. Maybe he was right. Was I really going to pass up an opportunity like that? I checked my watch. It was 10:30 at night. It wasn't that late, and besides, one of my dad's friends lived right next to the park. So I agreed, but with one condition. If anything seemed off, we'd leave immediately. Alex agreed. He sent them a message saying we were on our way to the park. They replied that they'd be waiting for us at the playground area. We left my house and started walking. The whole way there, I couldn't stop thinking, what if something goes wrong? We didn't even know these girls. What if someone else was with them? I didn't say anything out loud because Alex would probably just say I was being paranoid. After about 10 minutes, we reached the park. The playground was a little further inside, so I asked Alex to tell them to meet us at the main entrance since we were already there. But he just said, "Come on, man," and messaged them that we'd arrived. A minute later, we got to the playground. No one was there. I asked Alex if they'd replied to his last message. He said no, they'd only opened it. We waited a few more minutes, but there was no sign of the girls. We were completely alone in the park. I told Alex they were probably just messing with us and that we should go home, but he wanted to wait a little longer. Another minute passed, and then we heard footsteps behind us. When we turned around, we saw a man dressed entirely in black, standing behind a tree. He was staring at us with a creepy smile on his face. I told Alex we had to leave right away. This wasn't a good idea. He agreed. We started walking back toward my house, but I kept looking behind me, and there he was. The guy was following us. I told Alex, and without thinking, we started running. Just as we reached the park entrance, the man grabbed my arm and started screaming like a maniac. I yelled and kicked, trying to break free. I called out to Alex to help me, but he had already run off. The guy tried dragging me back into the park. I screamed as loud as I could, and then I saw red and blue lights. The man must have seen them too, because he immediately let go of me and ran back into the park. I sprinted toward my house, and a police officer stopped me. I told him everything that had happened, and he called my parents. He took me to the station to wait for them. An hour later, my parents arrived. The officer told them what had happened, and I did too. My dad asked if they'd caught the guy, but they said they were still looking for him. When we got home, my parents were relieved that nothing worse had happened, but they were still really upset with me for going out to meet strangers from the internet. They told me to go to bed and that everything would be okay. The next day, Alex came to my house with his dad. He apologized for running off the night before. He also said that when he got home and checked Snapchat, there was no trace of Anixoxo99 anymore. It was like she had never existed. Story 2. To give a bit of context, I was a teenager when this happened, around 17 years old. At the time, I used to watch a lot of YouTube videos about Omegle horror stories and weird pranks. I wasn't particularly brave or anything, but when I got bored, I'd sometimes end up doing pretty extreme things just for entertainment. After thinking about it for a while, I mustered up some courage and decided to go on Omegle. I wanted to do something funny, so I made up my mind not to respond to anyone, no matter what happened. That's when a guy appeared on screen who wouldn't stop telling me to talk, or else. Like any teenager, I wanted to mess with him, so I typed in the chat, "What are you gonna do if I don't?" He just replied, "You should talk more," and disconnected. I felt a little proud of myself for being a jerk to him, but at the same time uneasy. So I closed Omegle and started working on the homework I had due the next day. I'd only been at it for a few minutes when my dogs started barking, and they wouldn't stop, even when I told them to calm down. I figured maybe someone had made a loud noise outside, or even used a dog whistle. After settling the dogs down and refocusing on my work, I heard something. This time it was a knock on the back door of the house. That door leads to a fenced-in patio with a gate about 4 feet tall and a lock. The only way in is with a key, or by jumping the fence. I looked out the window and watched for about 10 minutes, but I didn't see anyone, so I called my dad and told him everything that had happened. He said he'd check things out when he got home. I accepted that. He's a doctor and always busy. About half an hour passed. My dogs were outside again, and then I heard a loud thud near the door. I looked around and saw a rock with a note taped to it. Right after, I heard my dogs barking at the driveway. The note said, "I know where you live." I had never been so terrified in my life. I felt lucky to have 3 dogs in the house at all times. I'm not usually one to show much emotion or scare easily, but that froze me. I was shaking and about to call the police. Was it all just a weird coincidence? Or did that guy from Omegle actually figure out where I lived? Story 3. When my friends and I were 15 years old, we used to spend a lot of time on Omegle. Most people probably already know what Omegle is, but just in case, it's a chat website that randomly pairs you with another person for a one-on-one conversation. You can disconnect at any time and start a new chat with someone else. Back then, the site was still in its prime, with around 150,000 people online at any given moment. We loved messing with people, making up absurd stories, and pretending to be someone we weren't. We were young, immature, and had a pretty questionable sense of humor. One day, we decided to take things way too far. Our prank that day involved telling strangers that we had kids locked in the basement. For some ridiculous reason, we thought that was the funniest thing in the world at 15. We expected the reactions to be hilarious. We said it to 1 or 2 people, and they just disconnected without saying anything. But then we got paired with another user who either genuinely seemed concerned or wanted to play along with our creepy message. We dropped the same joke on them. The stranger responded by asking why we'd be so despicable and said they were going to call the police. We laughed and quickly disconnected. We connected with someone else, but this time the first message that popped up sent chills down our spines. "How are the kids in your basement?" We froze in fear and immediately closed the chat. We tried laughing it off and reconnected again. But while talking to another user, another message appeared in the chat. "I'm still waiting for you to tell me about those kids." We decided to close that conversation too and tried one last time. The final message we saw before shutting everything down was, "I'm still here, and I'm still waiting for your answer." At that point, every alarm bell in our heads went off, and we finally decided to step away from the computer for a while. I remember being really worried that the person had actually called the police. Luckily, nothing ever came of it. From that day on, we stopped using Omegle as much. To this day, I still wonder if it was a site moderator who had the ability to reconnect with us or someone with hacking skills. I'm almost certain that what we said to that person scared them just as much as they scared us. In the end, we learned a valuable lesson. We weren't as funny as we thought we were. Story 4. Some of you may have heard of a website called Omegle.com. If not, it's an anonymous chat site people visit when they're bored. You choose whether to share personal information or not, and you can exit a conversation and start a new one with just one click. Back in 2012, I used the site a lot because I often felt lonely. I'd had some pleasant conversations there before, so I didn't see it as a bad thing. I was 16 at the time, and that's where I met Emily. She was a fun girl, really easy to talk to. From the very first moment, it felt like we'd been friends forever. I gave her my Skype and all my contact info so we could keep talking. Soon we were messaging every day, at all hours for months. She told me she lived in Wales, which I thought was awesome since I'd never talked to anyone from there before. I thought she was the best friend I'd ever had. We talked about everything in our lives. Crazy stories about things she did with her friends, typical girl stuff. Sometimes I'd wake up to photoshopped pictures of us with cats, captioned with silly puns like best friends forever or things like that. We messaged constantly, but I wanted to call or video chat. She told me she'd had a fight with her stepdad and he'd thrown her laptop against the wall, breaking the camera. I figured, well, at least she can still Skype me and I can turn on my video so she can see me. Why not? When we did, she wouldn't stop saying how jealous she was of me, telling me to stop being so pretty. It was flattering, even though I thought she was gorgeous in her pictures, so I didn't get why she'd be jealous. Emily was pretty emotionally dependent. She always wanted my attention and would get mad if I fell asleep or didn't reply fast enough. She also started making weird comments about her body. She'd say things like, "I think I have an ugly vagina. It looks like a coin slot. Can I show you so you can tell me if it's weird?" I'd just tell her it was probably fine, not to worry. Once she said, "I bet yours has sparkles and magic." I felt like she was trying to get me to send a picture. I didn't. I changed the subject. Emily also talked about a guy at the supermarket where she worked. She had a huge crush on him but was too shy to say anything. I encouraged her for weeks until she finally asked him out. That same night, out of nowhere, she asked me something random. "If I were a guy, what name do you think I'd have?" My stomach dropped. I'd never heard her voice, never video chatted with her. What if she was actually a guy this whole time? No, she was probably just trying to freak me out on purpose. She always loved getting a reaction out of me. Plus, her pictures matched everything she said. There was no reason to worry, right? I played along. "John." "I was hoping you'd say Jacob," she replied. That was weird, but again, I chalked it up to her just being her quirky self. We moved on. I told her she almost scared me with that, and she laughed, apologizing. One night we were talking like usual. She asked what state I lived in. I told her, thinking maybe she wanted to compare it to where she lived. Then she said, "You're only 500 miles from me." I replied, "No, that can't be." She said, "Yes, look up this school." Sure enough, it was in Alabama. But anyone could Google a school's location, so I figured she was just making it up to keep messing with me. Then she told me she'd fixed her camera and we could video chat that night if I wanted. I was thrilled. We'd talked for 2 months. Finally, I'd see her beyond just photos and messages. I set up in the living room, got everything ready, and called her. You know that feeling when you freeze in fear and everything seems to move in slow motion? That's how I felt the second I saw who answered. I thought maybe it's her brother or a friend and he'll turn the camera to her. But no, it was just him. I was paralyzed, speechless. He picked up one of his laptops and logged in as Emily to show me he'd been pretending to be her the whole time. He didn't say a word. Then he pulled out a camera and pointed it at me. That's when I snapped out of it and ended the call before he could take a picture. Why did he pull out a camera? I don't know. I tried to process everything, my heart pounding. Even though he probably wasn't physically nearby, it felt just as terrifying and violating. I took a deep breath and demanded answers. I messaged him simply, "Why?" He replied, "My friends dared me to catfish as a girl on Omegle, but you were really cool, so I kept going. I stopped talking to the others. I only wanted to talk to you." Guess what his name was? Jacob. He was 21, lived in Alabama. I couldn't wrap my head around how he'd maintained this entire fake life as Emily, day after day. Even with photos that made it all seem real, it was like Emily had actually existed and died that night. That girl in the pictures, who was she really? The weirdest part, sometimes it still feels like Emily is out there somewhere, but I know she doesn't exist. Story 5, a lesson I'll never forget. I'm a young girl, just in 6th grade. I wasn't stupid. Well, maybe a little, I still am. So please don't lecture me about internet safety again. I already know all about it, but I still made this choice. I know it was a terrible idea, and I swear it'll never happen again. Okay, let's begin. During winter break, I was bored out of my mind. I had the tablet I got for Christmas, along with a Bluetooth keyboard, but I didn't want to sleep. I remembered watching a bunch of YouTube prank videos about a site called Omegle. In case you don't know, Omegle is a free website with a safe version for ages 13+, and another inappropriate version that exists for obvious and gross reasons. Though for some disturbing reasons, some men still go into the safe version to show girls their anaconda. The site keeps you anonymous for safety and warns you not to share personal info. But me, in my infinite brilliance, thought, why not talk to strangers at midnight? What's the worst that could happen? The answer, everything. And I learned that the hard way. This was my second time using Omegle. It was January 2nd, well past midnight, and I logged on. In the interest box, I typed 5 sauce. After a few chats, a girl claiming to be 13 popped up. I knew it was fake, but I didn't leave. The girl started asking for personal info. I made everything up, except my age. Cringe. She said, "Cool, I'm 13, just 1 year older than you." Then she started pressuring me to show my naked body, offering to do the same. Obviously, I refused, and the creep behind the screen lost it. Turns out he had been recording me the whole time from his computer. He played it back on screen, and I saw a video of me drinking from my water bottle. A harmless image that, with a little editing, could be twisted into something awful. I told him he was sick, and he just replied, "No." And here's the genius part. Instead of leaving the chat, I grabbed my phone, kept talking to him, and recorded his threats. He said if I didn't show my body, he'd edit the video to make it look inappropriate. When I refused, he gave me 2 options. Show myself naked. Satisfy his bathroom fetish. Yes, disgusting. When I didn't respond, he thought I didn't understand and explained it. I stayed silent, and finally he left with a, "Guess you've chosen. Bye." At first, I brushed it off. He's not smart enough to actually do it, I thought. But then I started panicking. I cried silently so my dad and his friend in the next room wouldn't hear. I uploaded the videos to my private Instagram, which I shouldn't have had, where I only followed school friends. I asked for help, but barely anyone was online, just 2 people, so I avoided mass humiliation. One was my stepsister Val, 13, the other a school friend. My friend took screenshots and asked what was wrong. I told her, and she said to call the police. Terrified, I did. The operator was kind, but the officer who showed up, not so much. She scolded me and left, saying they couldn't arrest him because I let it happen, like I wanted it. Of course, I showed them the videos. My dad said he was disappointed, and long story short, everything got taken away. I was grounded from all devices. I didn't get my tablet back until Easter, after 83 days. My phone and broken iPod are still confiscated. I hate Omegle. Story 6. A year or 2 ago, I was one of those guys who used Omegle to look for sex. Yeah, I admit it was kind of gross. I'd usually chat, then move to emails and kick, and it almost always ended up in sexting or something like that. I made sure the girls were always under 16 because I was 15 at the time. Where I live, 16 is the legal age, so I avoided getting anyone in trouble. One day I met someone on Kik, and we hit it off immediately. Sorry for the pun. We talked a lot, and I found out she was from my same city, which got me really excited. At the time, she told me she was 22 or something like that. Looking back now, I might have been the biggest idiot in the world because I told her I was 16. We talked about meeting up in person, and at one point she brought up sex. Up until then, I'd only sent shirtless pics, which, let's be honest, don't impress anyone for obvious reasons. But this time I decided to send more intimate photos. She sent me some too, and they seemed real, so we kept going. We kept talking until one day she dropped a bombshell. She said she was in a relationship, but they were looking for a threesome. Being a hormonal teenager, I jumped at any opportunity and said yes. That's when apparently she showed our messages to her boyfriend. I got a ton of messages about what was going to happen, and honestly, I was excited. But at that point, both of them asked me if I'd ever considered or done things with guys. I got a little scared, but told them no to both and clarified that I was straight. At first they said okay, but they kept insisting, asking me over and over if I was sure. That's when I started feeling unsure and uncomfortable about meeting them, or even continuing the conversation. So I told them I didn't want to go through with it. And this is where things got creepy. They ordered me not to leave and bombarded me with emails full of insults, both sexual and regular. I ignored them all. I was scared, but I didn't think much more about it. Until one day, I started getting messages and missed calls with the same kind of harassment. I was terrified because I'd never given them my number or told anyone about this. It was them, but how? The messages said they'd send my photos to my parents and post them for all my friends to see if I didn't do what they wanted. I panicked. I thought about calling the police, but I was afraid I might get in trouble too. I asked them what they wanted, and that's when I found out it had actually been just one guy the whole time. He told me that if I didn't have sex with him, he'd follow through with his threats. At that point I said, "I'm underage. I'll report you for child pornography." He didn't believe me. I also reminded him that this was blackmail. Then he threatened to hurt me, and I replied, "You don't even know where I live." But he named a street near my house. I tried to deny it, but he wasn't convinced. I ignored everything for a whole month. I started taking long routes home from school, never went out alone, and when I was home, I locked everything. I deleted my email, destroyed my SIM card, and even cut my hair short so he wouldn't recognize me. I lived in fear for almost half a year before I got over it. I only told a few close friends for safety. This just goes to show you can't trust anyone online, especially when you're there for the same reason I was, and especially if you're underage. Story 7. No one truly understands how dangerous social media can be. It's a completely different world where anyone can pretend to be whoever they want. When this happened, I was 16 years old. I spent a lot of time on MySpace, like any teenager back then. I'd occasionally get messages, but there was one guy in particular who messaged me constantly. Sometimes I'd reply with a simple, "Hey, what's up?" without giving it much thought. One day, my friend, let's call her Hannah, and I were walking around town like we always did. We stopped at an apartment building near my house to rest for a bit. We were sitting on the stairs when suddenly a guy approached us from behind. He asked Hannah, "Got a lighter?" She said no, and he walked away. But 15 minutes later, he came back. This time, he stood right behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed the movement in his hand. I turned slightly and saw him touching himself in front of us. My heart dropped into my stomach. I quickly grabbed my phone and texted Hannah. "I think he's masturbating." We both froze. Then he sat down next to Hannah, so close that their arms were touching. I pretended to be on a phone call, hoping he'd leave. He looked at Hannah and asked, "Is her name Nadia?" Hannah panicked and said, "Ask her yourself." But I kept up the act of talking to someone. A few minutes later, a security guard showed up. He said to the guy, let's call him Antonio, "What's up, Antonio?" "Hanging out with these girls." I was visibly terrified. How couldn't he see it? The guard added, "Well, if 2 white girls go missing, I know who to blame." At that moment, I felt even worse. The guard left, but we were still frozen. Soon after, one of Antonio's friends showed up and asked, "Want to come inside?" Finally, I mustered the courage to say no, making up an excuse about needing to meet my cousin. As we stood up, Antonio's friend blocked my path and repeated, "Come on, just for a little while." I refused again, and Hannah and I headed toward the exit. My house was just up the hill. Then, they started following us. As we entered a tunnel, Hannah whispered, "Take off your shoes to run faster." We didn't want them to know where we were going. So there we were, barefoot, sprinting like our lives depended on it. We reached my street, rushed into my house, and hid in the back hallway. Everything was silent, just my ragged breathing and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I looked at Hannah, terrified, crouched behind the wall, watching the glass door in case they showed up. Eventually, we calmed down. I thought it was over, until the next morning. When I opened MySpace, I had a message from him. "Just so you know, I know which house you live in," with my street name. I blocked him immediately and never went near that building again. Weeks later, I found out he was in jail. Now at 25, he's still behind bars. I don't know what he did, but I hope I never run into him again, at least not outside a cell.